All right, Cheryl, you are good to go.
Okay, everybody. So hi. My name is Cheryl Ochayon, and I am actually coming to you from Jerusalem, Israel, where it is 7:21 at night on a Saturday night. I am assuming that you guys are mostly history or social studies type teachers who are interested in genocide and teaching the subject. Would I be right about that? Give me a hand if you are. No. Layla, what are you? Unmute yourself.
I'm a kindergarten teacher.
Get out. Okay, so you're just interested in the subject?
I am. My grandma went to the Holocaust.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, now I get it. All right. Well, I hope I'm going to be giving you some useful information, and no matter what you teach. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. I'm going to try and be a little bit interactive. So I have a Menti that's all set up to go, but maybe instead of the Menti, we can also talk to each other because there aren't that many of you here. Here's my screen. I'll tell you a little bit about the program that I'm with also as we start going through things. So I called this presentation, It Starts with Words, Teaching the Holocaust to Combat Hate. And there's a reason for this, because it is, okay, and here's my little blurb on the program. I'm coming to you, I said, from Jerusalem, where I work at Yad Vashem, which is the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem, Israel. And I have two partners. I work together with the Anti-Defamation League, used to be, now called the ADL, and USC Shaw Foundation. And the three of us together have come up with this incredible program called Echoes and Reflections, which is a terrific program for teachers who teach the Holocaust. It's all free, it's all online, it's all accessible, it's all curated, lesson plans, resources, you name it, we have it. So I'm going to be using a lot of the resources from that program today so that you can see them, and feel free to ask me any questions. If you want to use the Menti, then I'm going to be using menti.com, and we can use this code 38061486. There aren't that many questions, but I did want to make it a little bit interactive so you're not just listening to me ramble on for an hour. And I will try and keep it, I don't know, to like 50 minutes, so that there's definitely time for questions at the end. But that being said, if you want to interrupt me during, feel free really to unmute yourselves and we can talk, because again, it's a small group, so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay. So here's where I'm coming from. The Holocaust was the genocide of 6 million Jews during World War II. And it really could be said that it's the biggest hate crime that ever happened in the world. It's also probably the most well-documented genocide, not probably, it is the most well-documented genocide that has ever happened. So it really is a great case study if you're trying to understand what happens when hate really runs rampant and when people are just talking each other down and doing all these hateful things to each other, prejudice, racism, discrimination, how the fabric of society really does tear. And so we're going to use the Holocaust kind of as a case study to see that. So these are the goals that I have. First of all, we're going to take a look at the early 1930s in Germany and look at how anti-Semitism escalated, because anti-Semitism is basically hatred of the Jews. And it's been with us for a very long time. Anti-Semitism, we call it the longest hatred because it's been around for more than 2,000 years, which is also why it's so hard to get rid of. And Nazi racial ideology was replete with anti-Semitism. I mean, it was completely anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to take a look at how all of this escalated in the 1930s in Germany. And we're going to focus on how it begins with words, because that's always how it begins. The Holocaust is a very extreme example. It begins with words, but of course it became the genocide of 6 million people. So we're going to take a look at that relationship between words and physical violence, et cetera, et cetera. And then if we have the time, we're also going to connect it to contemporary issues, racism, discrimination, things that we can consider that way. So those are my 3 goals. It's big. They're big goals, pretty lofty, but we'll see what we can do, right? And you guys really feel free to stop me if you need to. If you need to ask a burning question, if there's something bothering you about what I'm saying, feel free to unmute yourselves and just jump in. Okay, so this is the Echoes and Reflections website, just so that you can see what it looks like. And our goal is to allow you to confidently teach about the Holocaust by giving you these lesson plans and these incredible resources. We have poetry and literature and art and testimonies and photographs and artifacts from the Yad Vashem Museum and all kinds of stuff. Yad Vashem, by the way, just so that you know, because it does sound kind of funny if you don't speak Hebrew, Yad Vashem actually comes from a verse of the Bible, from Isaiah, and it means, the Hebrew translates to mean, I will give them within my house and within my walls a memorial and a name that shall not be cut off. Yad Vashem is actually a memorial and a name. So part of our mission is really to give Holocaust victims back their names and their faces. And that's something that we try and do all the time. So, when I say Yad Vashem, now you understand a little bit more exactly what it means. So this is the website, again, Echoes and Reflections. And I'm going to tell you, let's talk about why all of you, except for Layla, why you all teach the Holocaust, why you're all interested in this subject, why you're here listening to me to begin with. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that when you teach the Holocaust, you're not just teaching about history. You're teaching about all kinds of bigger things. You are supporting your students' moral and ethical growth because you're examining prejudice and hate, which is what we're doing today. You're encouraging your students to think critically about their choices because you're going to see how choices really filter into every aspect of the Holocaust. People make choices, choices make history. And that's what happened in the Holocaust. Just by learning about the past and applying those lessons to the present, you are impacting your students to stand up, to take action, not to be indifferent. And those are really huge aspirations. Those are great things. If you can make that happen, I mean, that's just amazing. And you are going to try and lead to a better understanding of human behavior. So peer pressure, conformism, all that kind of stuff. And, it can do a whole lot more just so that you understand the US Congress, which passed this Never Again Education Act 2 years, going on 3 years ago, actually, understood that the Holocaust, teaching the Holocaust, can support a lot of different types of lessons. And you can see here, as intolerance, anti-Semitism, and bigotry are promoted by hate groups, Holocaust education provides context in which to learn of danger of weapon when hate goes unchallenged. And there is indifference in the face of oppression of others. Learning how and why the Holocaust happened is an important component of the education of citizens of the and realized it. I see that my internet connection is unstable, so hopefully everything is okay. If I skip out on you, I apologize. Okay. But again, you can see that Chris really thought about this. And that's why I submit to you, teaching the Holocaust is one of the do for your students. Even if you're not a history teacher, even if you're not a social studies teacher, it has all of these other great things to learn, to teach them. And just going into this for 2 seconds, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but we have Echoes and Reflections has done a survey. 2 years ago, we did a survey of 1,500 college students, some of whom took Holocaust lessons in school and some of whom not. And we found that students who had learned about the Holocaust not only had greater knowledge about the Holocaust, but they're more open to differing viewpoints. They're more willing to challenge intolerant behavior, and they show higher critical thinking skills. So this is really something. And if you take a look at this graph really quickly, again, this ability to see the world from someone else's perspective, you can see that dark blue line on the top, 73% of the people who had Holocaust education are able to do that. And this is an important one, tolerance of others, right? 75%. So all of this ability to work cooperatively with diverse people you see on the bottom, Holocaust education is just a good thing all the way around. Now, you all know, if you're history teachers, that when we study history, we use the past to kind of give us tools to explain the present, because there are all these patterns that we kind of don't really see unless we start to examine them. And so what it results in is critical thinking. Sorry about that. Critical thinking. So we're going to examine the past really to understand what's going on in the present. And that's why I chose this picture, which I think really just lays it all out. There is the man, you know, today looking at his past in the mirror, and he is a function of what existed in his past, right? Isn't that a great picture? Okay. So I want to introduce you without any further delay to Esther Ebe, whose married name was Clifford. Esther, as you can see, was born in 1920. She lived in Frankfurt, Germany. She was the youngest of 5 children. And when the Nazis came to power, she was 12. She was 16 in the photo that you see. And she actually passed away not that long ago, at almost 96 years old. And I want you to listen to Esther, because she's kind of going to give us where we're starting this whole lesson from. So have a listen to Esther. And this is one of the testimonies. Things like this are what we use to teach the Holocaust in Echoes and Reflections.
This is one thing that I want everybody to know, this hatred that goes on amongst people, amongst religions, amongst... I don't understand why people hate. If you have family, you have children, you have parents, you have grandparents. It's such a wonderful thing to have family. It is, nothing can replace a family. And I kind of hope and pray that nothing like this will ever happen, because this was all out of hatred. The question I always ask, why did you hate me? To kill my family, most of my family. And I haven't gotten the answer to that yet.
So if you want to join me in the Menti, again, use that code 3806-1486, and I'll go in there and start it up. So that, hang on, let me just get rid of this floating control here. Let me get into the Menti. And that way we can kind of do a word cloud. Sorry, it's back. Go away. Yep, I want to be in here, and I want to be in here. Okay, so sorry, press C to open voting. All right, hopefully this will work. What is Esther's message? Can you guys all see that? Yeah, are you able to get into the Menti, I hope? Let me just make sure that I'm presenting. Present.
I don't know where the Menti is.
You don't know where the Menti is? It's menti.com. Very easy, menti.com. And then once you get into Menti, it asks you for a code. There you go. Okay, somebody is in there already. Great. And the code is 3806-1486. Okay, so hopefully you guys can find your way in there. So what is Esther's message? Don't let it happen again. That's absolutely true. I mean, I think that's definitely what she's saying. What else is she saying? She's saying something she's saying a lot of interesting things. I mean, Esther, basically, I told you that she was the youngest of 5 children. And of course, parents learn from the past. Terrific. Her parents and 3 of her 4 siblings, is that right? 3 out of 5 were slaughtered in the Holocaust, were perished. Hate has no reason and can't be understood. Wonderful, wonderful. Learn from the mistakes of the past. Terrific. There is no answer to hate. Why would someone hate? So that they would kill her family. Beautiful, you guys. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. That was exactly what I wanted from you. And this is also what we, this is the way we teach this to students when we are running things like this. We play these testimonies and then we ask questions. And a lot of times, students will start to understand things because they're hearing from a person. Esther is a survivor of the Holocaust, and we're hearing from her about her experiences. So terrific. Thank you very much. I'm going to escape from this now and go back to the PowerPoint. There will be a couple of other places where I will ask you to go back into that Menti. So hang with me, and thank you very much for contributing. So I think you're all getting it. You're all getting it. Don't let it happen again. You know, what's this story with hate? Why would people hate so much? And studying the Holocaust really does teach us how people are othered, how racism poisons society, how indifference destroys a society, and what we're going to be focusing on today, how to understand the dynamics of hate and try to interrupt them or disrupt them. So the Holocaust really is a case study in the escalation of hate. And how can I say that? You know, this is what we're going to do. We're going to look at the Holocaust as this event that happened in the past, but we are doing this to engage our students to think critically about the present and the future. And that's really, really important. Okay. So you get it. And I love that smiling face. There is a German proverb that says, beware the beginnings. And that's why we are going to take a look at the 1930s in Germany, because the beginning of the process is always where you need to interrupt it. Because once things escalate, once things become more and more violent, it's harder and harder to interrupt, to disrupt this. And what we're going to try and do is use individual voices and faces again to see the impact of this message, because we're always trying at Echoes and Reflections, when we teach the Holocaust, we're always trying to create empathy. When you hear the voices of survivors, it builds empathy. They're telling you their stories. And what this does is it involves the students so that they care. They care about these people. They care what happened to them. They care about their stories. And caring gets this connection and this responsibility. And so hopefully it allows them to think about choices that they're making. So again, here is the question that we're asking. What was the progression from anti-Semitic words to beliefs to behaviors in Nazi Germany? And of course, my thesis, I'm coming from this point of view, is that words matter. And when we're talking about words, we're talking about communication in speech, in writing, or in behavior. And we're talking about something that vilifies, humiliates, attacks, or incites hatred on the basis of who a person is, their race, their gender, their religion, their sexual identity, you name it. That's what we're talking about. And so when I say words matter, all of this stuff matters. We have to really be careful, because words can be incendiary, and that's what you're going to see. Words can really fan the flames of hatred. And that's a very important point to always keep in mind. Okay, so again, here's Echoes and Reflections. As I said, just a tiny drop more about Echoes. You can see we were founded in 2005. You already heard about the partnership of 3 world leaders in education. We have empowered more than 100,000 educators, which is also pretty cool. And if you look down at the bottom left, that is my bottom line here. The most important statistic on this slide is that 98% of educators who know about Echoes would recommend it to their colleagues. So I think that speaks volumes for us, right? But also it's accessible, it's curated, and it's done. We have lesson plans that you can just go in and use, all there for you, all the resources. They're easy to use and they're free. And we also give you professional development, and we give you continuing education. So this is what our anti-Semitism lesson unit looks like. One of the big things in this unit, and you can see this is part of the lesson plan, is talking about stereotypes. Why? Because when you talk about stereotypes, that's where all of this starts. Stereotypes it's something that everybody does, something that we all do. We all stereotype. Why do we stereotype? Basically because we get so much information, and this is our definition of stereotyping. We get so much information all the time that we have to create these oversimplified generalizations. We need to understand who fits into what hole, what peg. This is just a basic example, and forgive me because it's probably not politically incorrect these days when there are all kinds of other other categories of people besides boy and girl. But you see, when you look at a birth announcement, it's a boy or it's a girl, that kind of creates expectations in your mind. There are stereotypes that go along with it. Very innocent, really very basic. Why do people stereotype? Again, because there's so much information. Why are stereotypes dangerous? Basically, because think about it for a second. When you stereotype, you are oversimplifying, you are generalizing, you're putting somebody who may not fit that description into this category. And what that does is it can create a lot of self-fulfilling prophecies. It can extend these generalizations. Even if the generalization is positive, it can have a negative impact on the victim. So, here are just some examples, right? I wear glasses, so I must be a geek. I get straight A's, so I must have no social life. I'm skinny, so I must be anorexic. All of these are assumptions that we make based on stereotypes. And this is, just a whole page worth of stereotypes for you. And there's a problem with that. There really is a problem, because here are all the problems with stereotypes. They ignore individual interests. They group everybody into one category. They may express negative things and therefore perpetuate these hateful attitudes. And by doing that, they can hurt individuals and entire communities, and the targets may begin to believe that they're true. So all of this is reason enough to be very careful when we're stereotyping, to think about what it is that we're doing, because a lot of times stereotypes are linked to othering and hatred. What do I mean by that? I love this picture because it's so descriptive, right? Layla, I see you have somebody there with you. Does she like the fish? They're cute, these fish, aren't they? So you can see what I mean, exactly what I mean. You have a group of these goldfish, and then there's that green fish that's different. And so that if you create that stereotype about that green fish, it's in a different group, you're going to cast them out, you're going to other them, you're going to marginalize them. And that's exactly what was done to the Jews in Nazi Germany. So if you're teaching about the Holocaust, that's what's going on. And we're not really going to get into all of this, the stereotypes about the Jews, because we don't have time for this. But we do want to talk about how anti-Semitism escalated in 1930s Germany. And in order to do that, because in order to understand how hatred escalates, we also want to be able to stop it. And that's the goal, right? Like the dominoes. So we know that it can be stopped. I mean, theoretically, it can be stopped, but let's examine how words were used in Nazi Germany to see what this propaganda was like, because this systematic selective use of words, this manipulation, is propaganda. And all of this material comes from our lesson plan on anti-Semitism. This is just a definition of propaganda, so I'm not going to linger on it. It's a tool of communication that can spread ideas and manipulate people. And this is the way it works. It repeats the same information over and over. You guys know this. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. This is contained in our unit on anti-Semitism because this is very basic and it's where we need to start. How does this stuff work? You've heard of fake news, right? We see it all the time. It's not just when you study the Holocaust that you see this. We see this all the time these days. So twists and exploits the truth, gives the illusion that most people agree with the message, appeals to people's emotions, talks to people in their own language, and uses accessible media. So let's take a look. This is Adolf Hitler. At whom must propaganda be aimed? Always aim at the masses. And his minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, said, when one lies, lie big and stick to it, because that's the way you get your message across. Horrible, horrible stuff. So what happened when propaganda was used to spread Nazi anti-Semitic ideology? And that's the core of the lesson here. We're looking at Nazi Germany. How are you going to teach the Holocaust when you teach it? I'm just going to divert for a second. Are you going to use statistics and names and dates? No, because then you're just going to get lost in all of this stuff. What you're going to do is you're always going to tell human stories, because human stories light up a different place in our brains and they make us think about people. And so I'm going to try and use as many human stories here as I possibly can, because if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. Just a quote that I really love, and I really do think it's true. So when we talk about the Holocaust, it's not that there were 6 million Jews murdered, there were 6 million murders of one person at a time. So we talk about human beings here, and that's my point, more than just dry facts. So let's focus on the people who are involved, see them as human beings. You've already heard from Esther. You're going to translate statistics into personal stories, but how? I'm going to show you. Here is Henry Sinison, and we're going to listen to Henry. Henry is going to tell us a little bit about his life in Germany before the Nazis came to power. So I want you to hear what he's going to say here, because I want you to compare it to what's going to happen to him after the Nazis come to power as a result of propaganda. So take a listen to Henry.
We lived in the center of Berlin. My parents were upper middle class. My father was a sales representative for a large textile mill. He earned a very nice living. We had a nice apartment. The ambience was cultured. We had music. I remember my parents dressing up in evening clothes and going to the opera. We had theater, and they would take us along. We were comfortable economically, at least before the National Socialist regime took over in Germany. I'm talking about the early years that I remember, in the early 1930s, before 1933. My father, in particular, was German first and Jewish second. Now, this does not mean that he was not an observant Jew. We were what was then called observant. In this country, in the USA, this can be translated into conservative. We observed all the holidays. We went to services Friday night and Saturday morning. If my father didn't have to work, he made sure that I went and my brother went. We both, my brother and I, sang in the synagogue choir. Usually the synagogues had boys' choirs. We celebrated all the holidays. My father never worked on the holidays. We were, without keeping a kosher home, yet we observed all the traditions.
So that's H. Henry. You hear him say he's talking about his parents going out to the opera and the fact that his father believed he was German first and Jewish second. It was important to them, their whole German culture, right? So keep that in your mind. And we're going to see a little bit of the propaganda that was used in Germany against the Jews, kind of to change everyone's mind, to brainwash them. This is a book that was written by Adolf Hitler in 1923-24, when he was in jail for trying to overthrow the government before he comes to power. And you see that he says the personification of the devil as the symbol of all evil assumes the living shape of the Jew. Okay, that's some heavy stuff right there when you talk about devil. This is The Poisonous Mushroom, which was a book that was read by children in school. You can see the characters on the cover of the book look very suspicious. They've got big noses. They're peering out from behind each other. There's a big Jewish star on the chest of this mushroom. And the message here is that Jews are like mushrooms after the rain. They're everywhere. You have to find them. You know, sometimes you can't tell them from other mushrooms, but they're the poisonous mushrooms. And you can see what the book says: German youth must learn to recognize the Jewish poisonous mushroom, learn what a danger the Jew is for the Germans and for the whole world, and learn that the Jewish problem involves the destiny of us all. And this is a storybook, okay, with little short stories about the Jewish poison mushroom, showing the shapes that Jews assume, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see that actually children in Germany did read this book. This book was put out as to have anti-Semitic messages in the form of short stories for children to read. This is one of those stories, one of the illustrations in the book, and you can see the Jew. You know him right away because he's got that big nose, and of course he's giving candy to these innocent Aryan German children, probably to try and get them to commit some kind of horrible behavior. So you understand what's happening here. This, of course, is how do you tell a Jew? By the shape of his nose. And you can see that that's really happening in the real classroom. This is a game that we have in the Yad Vashem Museum called Juden Raus, Jews Out. And it was meant to play around the dining room table, you know, at dinner time, before dinner. So you're indoctrinating even children. You can see those Jewish faces, those white cones, and the object of the game is to get them out of Germany, to throw them out. So you see the messages, right? This is a coloring book from the Hitler Youth. What was the Hitler Youth? It was kind of a paramilitary organization that boys over the age of 10 had to belong to. And this was a way that the youth was seduced. You wear these great uniforms and you have this flag and you pledge Heil Hitler, but at the same time you're being taught that the Jew is your mortal enemy. And this is what these kids were indoctrinated with. Okay, this is a poster for the Hitler Jugend, and this is a page from Echoes and Reflections, and you can see what it says. Since racial anti-Semitism lay at the heart of Nazi ideology, members of the Nazi youth movement were taught to hate all Jews and regard them as their foremost enemies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go back to Henry. Now you've heard a little bit about the propaganda that was used against the Jews. Let's listen to what Henry says, and bear in mind, again, we're talking about stereotyping and we're talking about othering, marginalizing these people. Let's see what he says.
In 1933, when the Nazis came to power, this started to change because my classmates, who were my little friends, and we visited each other and played together and did our homework together, what have you, must have picked up new vibrations at home, because suddenly they called us dirty Jew, they called us other names. They would not play with us, they would not invite us. Some of their parents would telephone my parents and say, I hope you understand, but if my son plays with your son and his other friends will, etc. They knew what was going on. They made excuses, but it didn't stop.
So you hear him say, they called us dirty Jew, they called us other names. In other words, he doesn't even want to say those names on camera, right? He was hurt. He was a little boy. He didn't understand what was going on. All of a sudden, his little friends didn't want to play with him anymore. And that's because the parents were being brainwashed by this propaganda. The parents were subject to this. They were reading these things, and the children also may have been reading these horrible books, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the propaganda is sending a very strong message that Jews are the enemy. We don't want them in Germany. We want them out. Okay. And he's feeling the repercussions of that. So just a little bit more about the propaganda for you. I'm going to go really, really quickly. You know, this is Nazi propaganda. This is from a film. This is from a book. Look at the Jew salivating. The Jew is kind of an eagle, a hawk, destroying things. This is, I just want you to pay attention to this banner that's over this, in the front of this store on a day which was a boycott of Jewish businesses. And it says, Die Juden sind unser Unglück, which means the Jews are our curse, or the Jews are our misfortune. And look where that appears. It appears everywhere. It appears on children's books. It appears in street posters. It appears in banners. It appears on bumper stickers, okay? On spare tires. It appears in this magazine that was put out every week called Der Stürmer, the attacker. And you can see on the bottom, every single issue of Der Stürmer said, the Jews are our curse. This is a magazine of, that's calling for the extermination of Jews. And it was really so widely read that it was a lot like social media. You could compare it to social media in Germany in the 1930s. Again, every single issue said the Jews are our curse. Take a look at this horrible, horrible cartoon. And again, the Jews are our curse right at the bottom. One more time, this is about ritual murder. We won't go into that. The way it was distributed is basically that it was put in these boxes on streets. You know, it's not the type of newspaper that you get and you read in private. People read it in public. And so the fact that all of these people were standing and reading this make it seem, as you saw in propaganda, make it seem like everyone believes it, even children, right? And so everybody is reading this and everybody is listening to this propaganda. Everybody is being swayed by this propaganda. So what happened to Esther? You remember Esther, she was actually the first woman that we listened to right at the beginning of this whole session about hate. What happens to Esther because of Der Stürmer? Take a listen to Esther. Let me go back here. I seem to be going the wrong way. Go back. Okay, let's listen to Esther for a second.
As the years went by, like in 1934, there was a terrible paper being published. It was called Die Stürmerzeitung, Stormtrooper newspaper. Everything seemed to be stormtroopers, troopers. And that was a horrible paper. That affected me terribly because it was, it had all it was plastered on all these stores that sold newspapers. And in the morning, going to school, I would see this Stürmerzeitung and people standing and reading them. And what did they list in this Stürmerzeitung? They had people's faces with long noses and saliva running from their mouth and looking at, of course, typically, you know, they meant Jewish people because they always wrote about Jewish people with their long noses. And they were looking at little Gentile children, greedily looking at the money that the children had in their hands, like they wanted to steal the money from these children. And they had terrible stories in there that Jewish doctors trying to inject Gentiles with poisonous medication. They had bankers that would swindle Jews out of their money. And here I was walking to school, and people were actually reading this, and young people, old people, of all ages. And by the time I got to school, I couldn't learn.
So you hear what Esther is saying. She was a victim of this propaganda. And she says, by the time I got to school, I couldn't learn. Remember that she's 12 years old when Hitler comes to power. So she's a little girl, right? And understand what's happening to her. She's being, she's being confronted with this hate-filled rhetoric. And she's completely, she's so frustrated by this and so cast out of German society. So we have to stay conscious of our words. I'm not going to play you. This is You Have to Be Carefully Taught from South Pacific. If you guys know the musical, I'm not going to play it for you because we're running short of time, but go back and take a listen because that's a great song. It's maybe 1.5 minutes long. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. This is something that children are taught. And it's from words. Words of hate become actions, and those actions have unimaginable outcomes. Like in this case, this is what we call the pyramid of hate. This is actually something that the ADL came up with, and it's something that teachers can use as kind of a diagram, a schema to study how hate escalates. And it starts at the bottom from these biased attitudes like scapegoating, insensitive remarks, accepting stereotypes, non-inclusive language. And I'm sure there's a lot of that wherever you teach, because there's a lot of it everywhere. And it works its way up to acts of bias and discrimination and then violence at the end. And what we have to try and figure out is how we can stop it, where we can stop it. So it's something that we can use the Holocaust to understand, and it's something that we can really understand today. So I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip Esther. I'm going to skip the Menti. And this is, with respect to the Holocaust, this is a picture of Auschwitz-Birkenau. This was the final end of all of that horrible propaganda against the Jews. So what we want to really teach children is to, I'm sorry, I'm skipping a lot of stuff just because I want to allow some time for questions. The Holocaust didn't begin with killing, it began with words, and that's very important for us to remember. And there are individuals and groups and nations that heard these words and made the decisions to act or not to act, because there's always a choice, right? And these are steps that the Germans took to marginalize the Jews. The Jews couldn't even sit on park benches. They couldn't have relationships with non-Jews. And when you have these hate-filled images and words that fall on fertile soil, that's when there's escalation. And that's what happened in the case of the Holocaust. And that's what we have to worry about today. So we also want to, send the message that you have to take action, because just being indifferent, just turning your face, that's, just silence, that's what does the harm. So I want to play you one more testimony and then I'll stop. This is the testimony of Kurt Messerschmidt, probably one of the most powerful testimonies that we have in Echoes and Reflections. And he's talking about the Kristallnacht pogrom. Those of you who are familiar know that we commemorated it actually last week on November 9th. And Kurt was about 21 years old when, is that right? 23 years old when the Kristallnacht pogrom happened. A pogrom is an organized, violent kind of riot. And this one was against the Jews in 1938, November 9th, 1938. And he's going to tell you what he saw and what he felt that night. And it's a very powerful testimony.
In 1938, it's one of those days which I can never forget, and we all don't forget it. When November 10th every year comes around, I'm the one who remembers this day vividly, while even my non-American friends, American Jewish friends, don't remember it unless they read finally about it. This was the so-called Crystal Night. That night, I listened to the radio, forbidden, BBC, the night before, and read all about what had happened in Paris, and that measurements would be taken to avenge the death of this Herrn vom Rath, killed by a Jewish boy.
I'll just stop Kurt for a second just to fill you in. Again, the pogrom was the arrest of 30,000 Jews, the murder of 91 Jews, and the looting of a lot of storefronts just because these people were Jewish. And it was blamed on the fact that there was a 17-year-old unstable Jewish boy who went into a German consulate and shot one of the German consular officials. And that was changed into a conspiracy of the Jews against the Germans, which did not exist, of course.
I listened to the radio in a friend's house, and I rushed home, woke up the next morning. My transportation to school was about 7 miles, was by bicycle. I was fortunate at that point, I still was allowed to have a bicycle. All these things were taken away later. I went through all these things, we lost everything. But on bicycle, I went through 7 miles of glass splinters. It's amazing that the bicycle lasted. My dear colleague, Uri Sonnenfeld, who was the main sports coach, was still there, and we sat there for a moment, deciding what to do. But there was no question. We took our bicycles and made a tour of the whole city of Berlin. We came to Friedrichstraße. It's a well-known term now. There was a little, very tiny cigar shop. The owner was a very, very old man, tiny old gentleman. But there were people standing around, 40, 50 people, and two of the Sturmabteilung, the SA, not SS. SS are the one in the black uniforms, and these are the brown, the brown shirts. of course, with all their equipment, and they forced this very old gentleman to pick up the tiny glass splitters one by one. And they forced this man to do this. And they all were standing there and watching. We didn't know what to think. But the only thing we could think of, was help. So we put our bicycles down. Rudy and I, we went in front of that group that was surrounding this old gentleman, went down on our knees, and started picking up glass splitters one by one to help this man. Briefly, I looked at the two guys. They didn't blink. They didn't move. Why did they not move? I asked myself. Are they afraid that the people might agree with us or not? I have never figured out what it was. But I'm sure in this particular situation that some of the people standing there disapproved of what the Nazis did. But their disapproval was only silence. And silence is what did the harm.
So that's a very powerful testimony. Of course, when he talks about the shattered glass, I'm sorry, I didn't explain Kristallnacht fully enough. There were all these about 7,500 Jewish storefronts that were broken into that night. And the name Kristallnacht, Crystal Night in German, comes from the glass, the shattered glass that was all over the pavements. So what Kurt is telling you is, he saw this, he drove through it on his bicycle. You can practically hear it crunching under the tires, right? The way he describes this. So it's a very graphic testimony, but what he says at the end is very important. He got down on his knees together with his friend to help this man pick up all of the glass splinters, but everyone else was standing around and watching, and they did nothing, even though he suspects that they approved of what he and his friend Rudy were doing. And he says, but they all were standing there and watching, and silence is what did the harm. So I'm going to close this way. And these are just some pictures of Kristallnacht really, really quickly, so you can see. This is the fertile ground, this dictatorship, brutality, the climate of fear that Hitler conjured up with the Nazis. And when you have this propaganda and laws that discriminate and marginalization, harassment, social death, peer pressure and conformity, all of this stuff is like this witch's brew. It's like this horrible combustion that leads, and this growing hatred and indifference and an unwillingness to stand up for the targeted group. And the problem is that it leads to silence. And when you have silence, then that's where you have violence. So this is what we have to think about. This is really what we have to think about in terms of what happens today, because we see it today. And I'm just going to go all the way down to the bottom, because this is what I want to leave you with, really, is that, we have to do away with violence and hate speech. Hate has no home here. And that's the message that you get from an incident, from an event like the Holocaust. This is something that we want to do away with. This is something that we don't want to have. My last slide has a QR code if you want to do an evaluation for echoes and reflections. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see you guys. And in the last few minutes that we have, we can just chat if you want to. Tell me, what was missing, what you need, how you can find this stuff, how you would use it. If you have any questions, of course, I'm happy to answer them. So feel free to unmute yourselves if anybody has anything they want to say. I know it's pretty heavy stuff. Teaching the Holocaust is not easy, and that's why we have these great lesson plans and resources for you in Echoes and Reflections. So we're trying to make your life a little bit easier. but feel free to ask me anything.
I don't have a question, but I have, it's happening right now. You
Yes.
know, this whole thing is happening right now. So it is very apparent that this could be the way we're going in the States. And that's why
yeah.
I'm here.
Well, I think it's, first of all, it's great that you're here, and that's a courageous thing to say, I think. That's like getting down on your knees and picking up shards of glass. And I think that if to use the Holocaust to kind of teach children that message without them, you know, that's the beauty of teaching history, is that you don't have to put it in their faces, and you don't have to say, this is what's happening today, be careful, you know, this is this party and this group, and you know, all of this conflict. You show them this event that happened, even though it's 80 years ago. I mean, again, it's so well documented, and you can really see how the hate just builds and builds and builds, and, you know, winds up with this genocide of 6 million people. God forbid anything like that should ever happen in the United States, of course. But I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a wonderful way to teach a subject like civics, like social, again, being responsible, trying to tell children that they have to be responsible for the choices that they make, and have them look at the words that are coming out of their mouths. I mean, that's why this is such an important subject. Social media, are they bullying? Are they being bullied? Are they, not that the Holocaust, again, that's two different things completely. I'm not comparing them, but you can use it. And I'm so glad that you raised the point, Holly. I think you can use it to show them the power of words, and to ask them to examine the words that are coming out of their mouths, how they speak about other people, not to spread hate, to at least, you know, if it's too hard to stand up against it, at least not to be part of it. And I agree with you. It's a dangerous time. Yeah. Anybody else feel that way?
Yeah,
Yeah. Very.
I've tried to get my students to understand that it's not even about maybe what they're saying, but them not saying anything. You know, we've had a lot of discussions, and I teach from 8th grade to seniors in 12th grade.
Wow.
So a lot of conversations on, if you've seen something happen, did you just sit there? Did you not say anything? Because that is just as bad as participating in it, because even if you're not an active participant, you're still a participant.
Good for you, Shauna. Good for you. Well, you know, that's what Kurt is saying. That's exactly what Kurt is saying. Silence is what did the harm. You can't be silent. You have to take action. And I'm so happy to hear that you're having those conversations.
I just keep having them.
Okay. You just, that's what you know, what else can you do? You just keep having them and hope that they're getting it. But that's the great thing, when you hear somebody else saying it and you realize that, you know, this is history. I mean, this is what was happening 80 years ago. And it's still happening today. There's, you know, learn the lesson, because we don't want the same outcome. And maybe they'll understand how dangerous it is if they don't do anything. Just keep fighting the good fight, Shauna.
I would say, so on that note, our time is up. Cheryl, that was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Good.
I have to say, and when I taught, I used your resources. I didn't realize, I was like, oh, I know these things.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So the session survey is in the chat. And if you choose to be with us for the next session, it is with Cheryl again. And it is called Teaching About the Human Spirit, Digital and Technological Resources. You guys have about 5 minutes, take a little break. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you again, Cheryl.
You're very welcome. Thank you guys for coming.
Bye.